In this video, we're going to be talking about why capturing pyro at live events is so difficult and why it's important that you expose pyro correctly. I swear there is nothing worse than reviewing footage or photos only to realize that the shot you were most excited about is completely unrecoverable. That's why later in the video, I'm bringing on a special guest who has over 12 years of experience shooting live events. She's going to help us cover what settings you absolutely need to know so that you can nail your shots the next time you shoot pyro. And before I forget, at the end of the video, I share with you my favorite hack for changing all of my camera settings for pyro within 2 seconds or less. Trust me, you're gonna want to do this. Also, in case you were wondering, pyro is just the industry word for saying fire or fireworks. I'm not really sure why they felt like they needed to give it a different name, but this seems to be a theme in photography and film production. Having properly exposed flames or fireworks in your videos or photos gives off a very high quality feel. And as this channel is all about creating high quality content and getting paid for it, this is something that I believe everyone should strive for. Being able to see the details in the flames gives a video or photo a whole new feeling, since the naked human eye can't see everything in real time. And let's get real for a second. As creatives, we want our work to stand out and get noticed. Because of how hard it is to pull off a shot like this, you now have an opportunity. Correctly exposing for a pyro moment is going to immediately separate your shot from someone else's. Not to mention, when you know you nailed the shot, it's one of the best feelings in the world. As you may know, live events are very fast-paced, and in many cases, important moments will happen without any warning, and it's on you to capture it before it's gone forever. Fortunately for us, pyro is unique in that it is not random, and the stage production is actually predictable if you're paying attention. Pyro is usually saved for the most high energy parts of an artist's set, and there will often be cues for when a big moment is coming. For example, if the artist is on the mic counting down, or if you can tell that the song is building up much faster than before, it's likely that a pyro hit is on the way. This will always depend on the genre of music that you're shooting, but you'll catch on to the cues quickly once you start looking for them. All right, I got some bad news.
Why not?
The level of difficulty when capturing pyro is not actually dependent on your timing. Instead, you need to be aware of two more important factors at play: the speed at which the moment happens and the extreme lighting changes in that moment. Some pyro hits can be less than a second long, and there's no asking them to redo it. The amount of pyro, again, is largely dependent on the genre that you're shooting, but it's important to treat each one as if it is the last one, unless it's super early in the set or you have an effects schedule and you know that there will be more. The speed of this moment requires that you not only anticipate when the hit is coming, but where you will be and what the frame will look like when you take the shot. The second factor requires that you anticipate the amount of light that the pyro is going to give off, in addition to the lighting changes from LED screens, spotlights, strobes, and any other light source that might be present. In real time, you will need to be adjusting your camera settings to compensate for these changes. Okay, I'm done with all the doom and gloom.
All right, listen, kid, I swear if this is some sort of Halloween prank, you're dead.
I know that all this information can make this sound more stressful than fun, but how insane is it that we get to capture 5, 10, 15, and 20-foot flames for a living? At the end of the day, the only way that you can learn is through trial and error. And no one knows that better than my good friend Taylor.
I'm Taylor Rogalski. I go by the Camera Lady. I do a lot of mostly festival photography. Working with C3 festivals like Lala, Bonnaroo, ACL, Insomniac festivals as well, EDC, also working at an Insomniac venue here in Orlando called the Vanguard. Worked at ESPN, still work there, also work with Disney Fine Art Photography doing weddings. Mostly festivals is mainly where people see me and know me from, and it's really just my vibe. I love the whole getting to do different genres and working and photographing people and doing sponsors and commercial work. It kind of takes all sorts of elements I love and puts it into one.
Taylor is going to be providing information primarily for you photographers out there because that's her specialty, while I'll run through the video settings. This next part is super important. You need to know manual, ISO, aperture, and shutter like the back of your hand. If you're not familiar with these settings and manually changing them on the fly, then pulling off these types of shots is going to be extremely frustrating, or at least more frustrating than it already is. If this is you, definitely continue to watch, but I'm not going to explain what your camera's ISO, shutter, and aperture do in this video. I'd highly suggest doing some research about the exposure triangle, what each setting does to your image, and when to use or change these settings. There's a ton of content out there that will explain it better than I can. One last thing, before we jump into the camera settings for both video and photo, this has to be said. Each one of you will have a different style, and each one of you has a different kind of camera. Taylor and I did our best to come up with general settings to use that will yield the best results, but ultimately you need to do what works best for you. When shooting video of Pyro, I'd highly recommend shooting at your camera's native or base ISO. For these types of shots, you'll always have plenty of light, so you'll want your ISO to be at a level that produces the highest quality image possible. I have a Sony a7S III, which has a dual native ISO of 640 or 12,800. In an ideal world, I'd always shoot Pyro at 640. But many times I find myself shooting at 12,800 out of convenience. However, there are some downsides to that, which I'll cover in a bit, but here's Taylor on the photo side of things.
When you're doing this, I know like obviously stage lighting is going to be typically great, or if it's darker, our instinct as photographers and videographers when you have a dark stage is I need to crank my ISO, I need to see everything, I need as much light to come in. But when you have a pyro hit that happens, cranking your ISO, like let's say 1,000, you're gonna like all of a sudden crank it and then it's gonna become brighter and then you're like, it's too bright now, I need to pull it back. So typically like when I'm doing pyro, I would treat it as if it's like daylight. So like I started an ISO 400. Sometimes I might need to go up to like 640, but typically for like pyro, like especially stage pyro, if there is a person on stage and I need to make sure I'm gathering everything, I really won't go over like a 640, maybe 800, but 800 I feel is still a little too much light coming in. So I feel like the 200 to 640 ISO is like a sweet spot. And then like, obviously play with it from there, because I might start at 640 like ISO and then like have the other ones take it, look at it and be like, I need to adjust some things. But the rule of thumb always, like when you adjust one, you have to adjust the others appropriately, whether going up a stop or down a stop to compensate.
So as a rough guide, we recommend an ISO of 100 to 800, but double check to see what ISO is native to your camera and start there. For pyro hits, you'll almost always want a higher aperture because of how much light there is, and more importantly, because many times you want more than one subject to be in focus. For video, this will be the most important setting that you use. This is because it's the only setting that you'll be changing in real time. This is because your shutter always needs to be double your frame rate, and you already have your ISO at its ideal setting. When I know that a pyro hit is coming, I crank my f-stop to a higher number and then I adjust as needed from there. In my experience, it's better to underexpose flames because it's much easier to increase the level of your highlights in post than it is to decrease them. And when you overexpose, you lose tons of detail. Remember when I said that keeping my camera at 12,800 ISO, even though it is a native setting, has its downsides? Super high ISO numbers have a lower threshold for air and more grain when you're attempting to adjust colors. This means that if I stay at 12,800, then I have to crank my aperture to f9 or even f12. Although I'll have a pretty good chance at exposing correctly, the high f-stop and ISO means that if I am off, then the image will be difficult to recover and I'll introduce a lot of grain into the image. So in a pinch, or when you need to be extra fast, go ahead and just crank that f-stop, but now you at least know what's happening. When it comes to photographing pyro, it's a completely different story.
So when I'm doing an f-stop, I want to make sure, because obviously flames can be in front of a person, behind a person, to the side of the person. I need an f-stop that's not just going to be focused on them and everything else is going to be blurred. I need to be able to see everything. So for an f-stop, I'll typically start at like a 4 or 5 as a minimum, if not higher. I won't go, I mean, you could go to a 9. I wouldn't go over a 9, just because you want to make sure you have that depth of field that is showing everything in focus. I feel personally it's okay that if like a flame that's like really far in front is like slightly like blurred, it's fine, you can tell what it is. But that's when you have that depth of field, you start to see like the more details in like the instruments and the person and like the colors of the flames as well. If you do anything, I feel above a 9, your ISO has to get cranked higher, or your shutter speed has to drop significantly, which when you're dropping your shutter speed significantly, it's going to let in too much light and you're not going to capture that more like spark of a moment. It's going to be more of that slow shutter, like as if you're doing a streak with a firework.
Photographers are not limited to only using the f-stop to adjust exposure because they don't have a frame rate to worry about. They can use both the aperture and the shutter to ensure that all the highlights in the frames are retained. So as a rough guide, we recommend starting at an f-stop of about f4 to f7 with a maximum f-stop of f9 or f12 depending on your circumstances. As mentioned previously, when you're shooting video, it's a general rule of thumb to keep your shutter at double the number of your frame rate. I'm always shooting at 120 frames per second, so I shoot at 1/250 on my Sony. For Pyro, shooting at a higher frame rate is to your advantage because you have to have a faster shutter, and as a result, it lets less light in and helps knock down those highlights. Personally, I haven't experimented with higher shutter speeds than 1/250 while shooting video, but I'd be curious as to if anyone has and what results they got. Photo, as I mentioned previously, is very different when it comes to shutter settings.
Shutter speed, obviously, like you want to freeze motion. Anyone, when you learn photography, ISO 400 is typically a sunny day. That's where you want to start. Same with like a shutter speed. A shutter speed of 400 will typically quote unquote freeze motion, depending on how fast your subject is moving. So like with shutter speed, obviously flames can be anywhere from like a long burst and they're going to be held out for 2, 4, 5 seconds to like and like it's done. For me, I like to make sure that I'm setting a shutter speed of at least 400, 320, 400 as my starting base, because I don't know if it's going to be a long one. If it is a long one, it's still going to freeze if I'm on like a continuous high or continuous low. If it's lower, I'm probably going to start losing it because it's going to go so quickly. Or if it's going so long, then it's too much light coming in. So I like to start at like a 320, 400. Sometimes I'll go up, you know, to 800. But I don't like when you start to go over again 800, when you're getting into like 1,000, 4,000, it's going to start to get darker because it's just like a quicker release and a quicker capture. I wouldn't say it's not okay to go to 1,000. It's just you have to learn to balance and make all of the mechanics work together.
So as a rough guide for video, we recommend using a shutter that is double whatever frame rate that you choose to shoot in. And for photo, we recommend a shutter of anywhere between 1/320 to 1/800. And the moment you've all been waiting for. The hack that I use to change settings for Pyro almost instantly is a custom shooting mode that I added to my camera dial. Most intermediate and professional grade cameras will allow you to assign custom shooting settings to a particular mode. For me, I took my custom profile number 2 and set it to shoot at 120 FPS with a 640 ISO, 1/250 shutter, and an aperture of f7. With one turn of the dial, I can instantly be ready for a big moment. This has saved me so many times, and I highly recommend looking into how to create custom settings on your camera. Nailing a Pyro shot is without a doubt the most rewarding feeling, and I really hope that you now have a good base for how to approach these types of shots, and I'm excited to see what you guys capture. If you made it this far, I just want to say thank you for investing your time in this video, and that if you found some level of value in it, definitely like, comment, and subscribe so that you can find me again, and also so that I can beat Nikon in subs, because we can't be having less subs than a company that sells potatoes. I'm actually pretty sure Taylor shoots on Nikon, so that's unfortunate. But shout out Taylor for helping us today, and I'll link her IG down below, so definitely go check her out. But anyways, Wrk To Create, Wrk To Inspire, and I'll see y'all in the next one.